30s, a guy is plowing, literally plowing in Syria, and he hit something with his plow, and then one thing after another. He discovered, when it's all said and done and they do all the excavations, they discovered a library of the Baal tablets. They had been put on clay, hardened and everything, and even with the rain and everything else had survived. And so for the first time, we had access, rather than just what the Old Testament says against it, what the people who said who were for it. And so I would just want to do a couple of things. There's a lot that we won't be able to cover, so there'll be things for you to look at. But one of the things that we had just mentioned, and I know this is a short way to do this, but anytime that you look, and I use the word polytheism to mean many gods, and so stop and think, how many years are God's people in Egypt? 430 years. And there's just God. You look at the Egyptian pantheon, there may be a human body, the head of, and you go everything from an eagle to different kinds of creatures and stuff. And so they were absolutely immersed in, and may I use the word polytheism to mean many gods. And I just nearly hold my head. We get to Mount Sinai, we've been delivered, we get there, Moses disappears for a while. My vote for the biggest whopper in the Bible is, golly, it jumped out of the fire. What jumped out of a fire? And where did they get that idea from? They have been in a country just saturated with many, many gods. Well, where are they going? Into Canaan. And Canaan is a land, and while the gods are different, it's still the same type thing. And so when you have polytheism, and all I'm trying to say here is that the gods are within the system. And we're just going to kind of illustrate some of them, give you some verses to look at, but all these different gods, and we'll define who some of these are before we get through. And here's the big difference. Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord, whatever you want to call him, he is always outside. And a polemic is an argument against. Okay? So even the very first words of the Bible say, in the beginning, what happened? God created. And what does that show? God's not in the system. God's not a part of all the things that happen on the outside, separate from, and being the creator, and rather than one of the creatures, then God created. And so monotheism versus polytheism. And so the big issue is, when you have many gods, who's in control? What happens if you offend one of them? What happens if one of the gods get angry? And there's just this constant sense of fear. And we touched on this, but let me just do it really quickly. When you carefully read Mount Carmel and Elijah's mocking at them and shout louder and shout louder and shout louder, and what do? They take out the swords and the lances. And I've showed some of you, I had an accident crawling up a corner post and it fell. And the only thing I remember before they took me to the hospital was that stuff was hanging out like in ropes from my arms. So I fell down a corner post that fell, that had long spikes on it. And so it just opened. Okay, I don't know if I passed. That's all I remember. I don't remember going to the doctor. Thankfully, it's all blocked out. I would never do that on my own will. So you just think about that. How afraid do you have to be as a custom, as a normal thing? Oh, whenever you can't get through, whenever they don't hear you, when they don't listen, oh, we pull out the swords and we lances, and we start cutting ourselves and look very carefully till the blood starts spurting out. And so the two emotions, and I didn't put them in, but it's here. Fear is the predominant emotion of this. And every time God's people worship the one God, it's joy. There's just a whole different mentality. So just a couple of highlights, and this could nearly be a whole quarter of lessons. But I just didn't, and these are just some things I've done, but just to illustrate this, because this will run all through Jeremiah, all through Ezekiel, but it's really all through all of our books of history. Idolatry is a constant feature of Israel's life. Even with Jacob, give me the family gods and let's put them away. And you just, as you read through, they're just nearly saturated with it. Lord willing, on a Sunday night coming, we're going to talk about the burning bush. And one of my Old Testament teachers said, there is a sense where the Lord started a war, a battle with idolatry and polytheism that he does not win until 1,000 years later. And when the people come back from captivity, they've never been idolaters since. Burning bush, 1500, 500s. And you read through the Old Testament, and here's something else that to me is, I just feel so strongly about this because I hear it quite a bit. That angry, vengeful God in the Old Testament. You know, Tim visited with somebody recently, and I just can't believe a God who would just kill those innocent women and children, that angry, vengeful God. Well, what we're going to see is that he sent prophet after prophet. Poor Jeremiah is beaten and thrown in a well, and God's going to do everything he can to prevent the people from going into captivity rather than saying, let's just strike these people down. And so it's actually just totally the opposite, and that's something we'll come to later. So you can just see passages about idolatry and the 10 Commandments against polytheism. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. You shall not make any graven image. And again, can I say polemic? A speech against. Even the very first two things have to do with the challenge where they have come from and where they're going. And we'll look primarily at the things that happen where they're going. This little figure, if you put the gods in the square, okay, and this is a little bit of a kind of a mental word picture. But if you think of the gods, and again, many gods, it's called different things, but the clearest way, just in English, is use the word. There's an ultimate realm above the gods, in that none of them are totally in control. This is true of the Greek gods, it's true of the Roman gods, but it's true of the gods going into Canaan, which are going to be Baal and several of these others. And so in order to get, if your gods don't listen to you, and again, look at Elijah on Mount Carmel, you have to do drastic something, whether it's magic or something else, in order to get to the ultimate realm if your God or gods don't listen to you. We've touched on this very briefly, but you remember, they are the gods of the hills. Next year we're going to come back and fight them in the valleys because they're the gods of the hills. What is Jonah doing? He gets on a ship to do what? Flee the presence of the Lord. God lives in Canaan. We're going to get on a ship and leave to do that. Naaman is cured of leprosy, and he says, Lord, may I please take, and I don't remember, 2 or 3 bags of earth from where I was healed back to Syria. God is the God of a location. And so if you never have the certainty because you have many gods, there's always this fear element. And listen how often we are not to be involved in depending on your translation, witchcraft, necromancy, speaking to the dead. There's just a thread that runs through, because when something happens and things don't go right and your God doesn't listen to you, then you need to do something to circle the gods and get to the ultimate realm in order to get your answer, and that contributes a lot to the fear. So here's the 3 key ideas, and we're going to turn the page. The gods are in nature. Fear, who is in control? What if my God will not listen to me? And then get ready, and we're not going to do the R version because this just gets really gross in a hurry, and it's all through our Old Testament. The appeal to man's lower nature, and we're going to see it's going to be sexual immorality in the name of worship, snake worship, child sacrifices, and sacrifices to animals. And you're reading through, and here is a king of Judah, and he sacrificed his son on the wall. And you're thinking, why would you ever sacrifice your children on the wall. Well, when you're involved in the polytheism and the fear drives that, then all of those things become a part of it. We become like we worship. Turn the page. Why God is so specific about idols and idol worship. And this is going to be, and again, we knew some of these just through Scripture and other stuff, but just imagine this, as these documents become translated, it's like, and I mentioned this last week, can you imagine only having American documents of the Cold War with Russia the last century, and then, several hundred years later, then you find Russian accounts of the same thing. It wouldn't change what happened, but you're going to have a whole different view of what's going on if you're actually hearing, if you've only just heard one side. And so into the 20s and 30s, wherever exactly that was, these documents start being translated, and I didn't bring them in. I have maybe 6 or 7 books just on, and I'm going to use the word myth to be the story, the Baal story. So let me give you banner, and then we'll kind of fill in some blanks. If you've been in an Old Testament class, we mentioned El is the Semitic, that whole region. That's the root word for God. And we're going to see Israel, he who wrestles with God. Daniel, Ezekiel, God is strong. And every time you have El in a Hebrew name, it has something, it's some derivative of God. Well, in the Baal myth, El was like the senior god. Do you know the word emeritus in a university? If someone's the president of emeritus, what is he?
He's been the president.
He's been the president, a figurehead. We respect him, but is he making the decisions day to day on what's happening? No, he's probably a fundraiser. He's there for goodwill. So if he's president emeritus, we respect the fact that he's been there, but the very word, he's really not pulling the strings today. I'm sorry, this is a rough way to say it. To the Canaanites, El was God emeritus. He had been the father figure, but a new God came along, and guess who his name is? Baal. And there's a whole list of these. Baal is the God who quickens. Baal is the God who rides the clouds. And you'll hear in the Psalms about, no, Yahweh rides the clouds. Baal is the God of the thunderstorm, and Baal is the God who brings rain. What had happened for 3 years before Mount Carmel happened? There had been and so these Baal worshipers are panicking, and all this stuff's been going on to try to get to the ultimate realm, because it's not that the system is flawed, it's that somebody hasn't been observing the system. And so when Ahab sees Elijah, the first thing he says is, you're the trouble, you're the problem. It's not that the system is wonky. You haven't been participating in the system, and there was an enormous amount of peer pressure to get people to get involved in this. Okay, this is going to be gross. We go head up morning, but here's a PG version of the Baal myth. Okay, the seasons, obviously, and we're going to do winter, spring, summer, and fall. And who is Baal? He's the God who quickens, the God who brings life. And so these next two gods, Mot and Yam. Yam is the god of the deep. And the deep is the basic place where evil and bad things happen. And there's another god in the deep named Mot. And so, and this is going to happen every year. And don't say this doesn't make sense, because this was just the myth, and this is what was the explanation. If Baal is the God who quickens and the God who brings life and everything else, the myth is that somewhere between the fall and the winter every year, Baal is consumed by the forces and overcome by them of the deep and Yam and Mot. And it's gross. There's a description of him crawling over the lips of Mot, and he's swallowed up. And so the winter time there's no fertility, it's cold and everything else. And so something's happened to our fertility god. Okay, here's where things start getting really gross. What happens is that the sister, Asherah, is also his lover. They're talking about Baal. And so This is gross. Every time you have a Baal and Asherah, you're going to have a system of worship that is done by sexual immorality. And so the myth went, in order to encourage her, and I'll explain why, Asherah, to throw this banquet and have this dinner and to cause things to conquer, then the men need to go have sexual relations with the priestesses of Asherah. So think about this. Worship, and I'm using worship in this system, and ladies, we can't even hardly go here, is you sending your husband down to the temple to have relations with the priestesses of Asherah so she gets stirred up and encouraged to bring about the spring. And so as the myth goes, between the winter and the spring, Asherah has a banquet and she invites Mot and Yam to the banquet. And guess what she does to the forces of evil? She slays them and kills them. Baal is finally released, and when he's released, what happens in our springtime out here on the prairie? Thunder, lightning, the rain, the fertility, the crops. And so while this is just the natural cycle of nature, when you put the Baal myth into this, then these are the characters that are involved in this process and what goes on. And like I said, the mentality was, and I can't even hardly say this because it's so wrong. Okay, guys, everybody needs to worship. Okay, we're quite happy saying we all need to come to church on Sunday. Okay, everybody's good with that. If you're involved in the Baal worship, everybody needs to worship. And so just think about how ungodly this is when planned actual sexual immorality is a part of worship. You look at the moral decline that's going to take place in the whole culture. And we'll say this before the night's over, but I want to make sure I don't forget it. By the time that Judah is destroyed, they have perfected Baal worship and are more involved in it than the Canaanites were when Joshua came into the land. I mean, think about it. The Israelites are more immoral, they're more ungodly, they're doing more of these things. They have just taken it to a whole different level. And God sends my servants, the prophets, and they're not going to listen. We're going to have hard heads, hearts of stone, but we're really into worship. Yes?
Did the women not worship?
They would be involved with it in some way or another, and it was because she is a feminine goddess. The big focus was upon the men being involved to make sure that she had the dinner. And see, what does Jezebel do? She throws the dinner, oh, we'll get this field for you, and what do? We kill the guy. Jezebel is the physical incarnation of Asherah. And anything that you think of as just immoral and ungodly, that's normal. And we are designed from the very beginning to become like what we worship. Now, here's the places, and we'll leave you to look at all of these, but look at number 3. A lot of this worship took place on the high places. Oh, he was a really good king, but the high places were not taken away. Can I do a musical ditty? Dun, 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 dun. Every time I hear high places, because I know what's taking place, and sometimes the immorality was there, sometimes it was in a temple, but every time you come, and it's all through your Old Testament, every time, oh, they were worshiping at the high places, then this type of activity is going on, and the encouragement for sexual immorality is going on, and so the high places were one of the, well, again, the many gods were going to go to a high place to try to make contact with our God. Green trees, fertility sign. Asherah poles, there was some kind of an idol that's made. And so, again, get ready. They are brother and sister, Baal and Asherah. And, again, when you read carefully, memory says 1 Kings 17, I think there's 400 prophets of Baal or 450, and guess what? There's 400 prophets of Asherah. So there's a whole group of prophets for her as well. So you have a polytheism, and this is gross, but you have, in essence, and they're gods, but you have a brother and sister having sexual relations in order to bring about rain and fertility in the springtime. And once God's people get involved with this, there's just a downward slope that never stops. And see, for example, after Solomon, the kingdoms divide in 931, and Israel's taken into captivity in 721, so just less than 200 years. And what was the first thing that Jeroboam did? At Bethel and Dan, what did he build?
Golden calf.
Two golden calves. The golden calves were never taken down. And we go all the way back to Mount Sinai. Golly, he jumped out of the fire. And so that symbol of polytheism, the worship of animals and other stuff, Israel never got out of it. The majority of the time, Judah was involved with it. And so every time you have a good king, then one of the things that's going to happen is that they're going to be involved in having an attack on those types of things. Turn the page, and I'll leave you to read most of these others. Here, and these are samples. There's just you just start going through your Old Testament, and how often is the word Baal used? And so, and again, for the people listening in, Balak brought Balaam to the high places of Baal to curse God's people. Remember the guy that went in the tent and took a spear? They weren't playing checkers. If you kill a man and a woman with one spear at the same time, then this immorality had already started among God's people. And you'll see in Judges 2, 11, 13, they served the Baals and Ashtaroth or Asherah. So the brother and the sister are going to be involved with it. 1 Samuel 7, put away the Baals and the Asherah, they serve the Lord. I just can't hardly read Hosea 2:16. You will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal, says the Lord. And so the reason I want to do this is that there's a thread that runs all the way through the Old Testament, and Baal is a part of it. Sometimes Asherah, there's a Judges 10 and 6, 1 Kings. But then notice, and again, samples, how many times is the word high places used in the Old Testament? See, over and over and again, then the high places are mentioned because that's where the worship is taking place. And then the green trees, and those are symbols. Every time you hear high places, green trees, and those other things, then you immediately know this process is going on. And in the midst of what was done in terms of fertility worship, then ungodly immorality, and then we do the whole thing, snake worship, and eventually we're going to be involved in sacrificing children. Now, this is Baal, and I just can't even hardly do this. You will hear the word abomination out of God's mouth. There was a god named Chemish, and it's like a hollow, huge statue with big arms. And ladies, get ready, this is even grosser. They would heat the thing up and put small children down, and as they rolled down, the skin would peel off of them, and they would asphyxiate as they rolled down the middle of the god. And again, how afraid do you have to be to do something like that? So when God says, oh, that abomination, then we're going to have all these things where children are going to be sacrificed, children are going to be burnt, and it just goes on and on. And once you leave, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, which is kind of the single cornerstone of the Old Testament, and you go into any type of polytheism, and this is the one we hear and know the most about because of the Baal worship, then all of those things start coming in, and the challenge and the quest, who's the God and who's in control, become very important. We have another 4-page outline that we won't get much out of tonight, but I want you to look at this single page. There's other characters that are involved in this. Leviathan is a god in the deep. And if you notice, Job 3:8, Job 41, you can draw out Leviathan. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. And the Psalms will laugh. God created him. Rahab, we know Rahab in Jericho, one of the gods is also called Rahab. And Rahab also dwells in the deep, and you'll see things about he crushed the head of Rahab. And I can see people thinking, why would he crush the head of this woman who they rescued from Jericho? And then when you know, oh, Leviathan and Rahab are part of the deep and the evil that's there. The two gods, Yam, you'll see this, is the sea god, and Mot is the god who swallows Baal each year. The deep is the place where evil dwells. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit of the Lord moved across the face of the deep. See what I'm saying about polemic? Moses is trained in all of the wisdom of the Egyptians. He knows polytheism inside out because he's Pharaoh's daughter, and he wasn't sheltered from it. He knew every single aspect of that type of polytheism, and God, the same way that Paul is trained at the feet of Gamaliel. So Paul knows Judaism inside out because of his prior training. And so the polemic against polytheism starts with the first two verses of the Bible. God is not in the deep. God is not the one who's afraid. God is the one who is outside. And the deep is the place where all of these other things take place. And even from the very first verse of the Bible, Moses is starting this polemic about, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. We saw the wondrous works of the deep, Psalm 107:24. Oh, whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and earth, the seas. See, there's no fear. If God's the one in control, there's only one. You honor and worship him, and that's it. We sing a song, All ye floods, ye dragons all. Hallelujah, praise Jehovah. Again, praise the one God. All the things that the Canaanites are afraid of, ye floods, ye dragons, all are these sea creatures. That will be the King James Version, sea monsters. And again, Genesis 1:21, God created the great sea monsters and every living thing that moves. So all I want you to see is this point. From the very first chapter and literally the first words of the Bible, for the people who are involved in this, because the first readers of the first 5 books are getting ready to go into Canaan, and the very opening section is a polemic against this whole thing of the gods being included and involved, and that becomes the basis of, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. My apology, this could have taken 4 lessons to do, and I wanted to do it just in a short time. Okay, we're ready to do tonight's lesson. And again, I'm so grateful that you're here. Just help pass some out. When your pulpit preacher and Elder Bill Crane says, he is not an environmentalist, he is slaying trees left, right, and center, I try not to have too many handouts of of extra things. And so, do I? Failed. Yeah, I failed. Guilty. And I'll try to have more of these done next time. Running start. How do we know a true prophet? Deuteronomy 18. If the things that the prophet says do not come to pass, do not be afraid of him. And this is going to be the acid test of a true prophet. Ezekiel in number 2, when he is called, and if you remember Job, friends came and sat in silence, and 7 days was the days of mourning in antiquity. And I always remember Job's friends did pretty good the first 7 days. And so Ezekiel is going to be called among the captives And he's just in utter silence for 7 days. We'll see more of this later. There are times that he becomes bound and he's actually mute and can't talk, and God won't let him talk until the word comes to him. And we mentioned this last week. It's hard to imagine a prophet who can't talk. I still maintain Tim Lewis would bust within a week if he couldn't talk. We're great friends. That's not a cut. That's just the reality of how things are. But that's what I'm saying. You're the prophet. And think about it. You're mute. And then God says, and when I speak to you, you will open your mouth and you will tell the people this. And it's just one of those challenging, unique things. Ezekiel 33:11, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. God wants all people to be saved, come to a knowledge of the truth. And the people that he's listening are speaking to and are listening to him. And we're going to see this expression, hard foreheads and a stubborn heart. So look at the overlap. Ezekiel may have heard the preaching of Jeremiah in Jerusalem before being exiled. And I'm just convinced that many of the captives, the exiles in Babylon, and so again, they're going to leave Jerusalem, go up the top of Syria, down the Fertile Crescent. Because of the length of Jeremiah's preaching, some of the captives would have heard Jeremiah preach before they were taken captive and gone to Jerusalem. And I just go ahead and get ready. The people in captivity are not going to listen any better than the people in Jerusalem. It's going to be the same group of people. Jeremiah 2:1. Well, notice this. Jeremiah's a traitor. God says, surrender to the Babylonians. He's imprisoned, he's beaten, he's thrown into the bottom of a muddy well, left to die. He's ridiculed, and he's verbally and physically abused. Imagine this. God says, you know, when we were on the honeymoon in the wilderness, that's when you were faithful. You read Numbers, oh, these 10 times they have rebelled against me. Moses, step aside, I'll just wipe them all out and we'll start all over. And you want to see how bad things are? God is saying, I wish you were just as faithful as you were when we were newlyweds and you were so faithful to me in the wilderness. And you begin to see what I'm saying? The people are at a lower level, both in terms of their nation, but they're also lower than the other people that came in. Jeremiah 2:4-5, they went after worthlessness and they became worthless. They have defiled my land. They've made my heritage an abomination. And this is going to be the shedding of innocent blood. Manasseh, who was the longest king, 55 years, the streets of Jerusalem ran with the blood of innocent people who were killed during his reign. And God finally says, don't pray for them. Don't waste your breath. And this was a little bit earlier, but it was the shedding of innocent blood. And this is all going to be a part of the ungodliness that was involved in this. But Jeremiah 2:28, look at this. As many as your cities are your gods. And then when you read 11:13, yes, you have as many gods as your city, and as many as the streets of Jerusalem are the altars you have set up to shame, altars to make offerings to Baal. You hear the expression, there's a church on every corner in Nashville? Okay, there's an altar to a god on every corner in Jerusalem. And these are God's people. Back page. Remember, Abraham got God down from 50 to 10. Jeremiah is sent, if you can find one righteous person. There's a Greek philosopher that went through the city with a lantern looking for a certain type of people. And God says to Jeremiah, oh, I went to this part of the city. Oh, I'm in the wrong part of town. I'll go over here. And Jeremiah goes through the streets of Jerusalem and cannot find one person who does justice and righteousness. I mean, it's just nearly incomprehensible, but that's who the people were. And then he says, they have made their faces harder than rock, Jeremiah 5:3. So we're down to number 2. And here's the prophet. They have hard foreheads and a stubborn heart. They will not listen. We're going to see this later. Jeremiah 36:26, I will take out your heart of stone. And so look at the description. And again, this is from the audience. These are the people that Ezekiel's speaking to. He is a maker of allegories. They will come to you as one might go see a sideshow. Can we say what's the term down at the fair where they have the carnival stuff? Midway. Ezekiel's like one of the guys down the Midway. It's a sideshow. Let's see what is the word that's coming forth. They are a rebellious house. We're in Ezekiel 33:30. They will come as people come. They will sit and they will hear. Okay, so far so good. But they will not do it. You are like one who sings lustful songs with a beautiful voice and plays well on an instrument, for they will hear what you say, but they will not do it. When these things come to pass, they will know a prophet has been among them. Moses, what's a true prophet? If the things do not come to pass, don't worry about them. Ezekiel, they're not going to listen. You do this anyway. And there will come a day when they know that there's been a prophet among them. And this is repeated over and over and over. You will know that I am the Lord. So look at Ezekiel 3:4-7. Speak to them, they're not foreigners. If I sent you to foreigners, they would listen, but the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you, for they are not willing to listen to me. Next page. Because of all the house of Israel there it is, a hard forehead and a stubborn heart. Ezekiel 28, they rebelled against me. And look at 20:39. Go serve every one of you his idols. Not single, plural. The majority of the people who are Israelites have multiple idols that they're involved in worshiping. So prophet is used 90 times, the rebellious house. And then you'll look down in chapters 2 and 3, they are unfaithful wife, they're worthless. And you speak to them, you tell them what I'm going to say, regardless of what they say to you. We're going to save the very bottom for another time. Let's go to the back page. The difference in the law of Moses and the other covenants of the Bible is that it's a two-way street. All the things that are done in this covenant we will do, say the people. And notice, Jeremiah 31:32, my covenant they broke. The longest quotation in the New Testament is in Hebrews chapter 8. The days are coming, says the Lord, when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not like the covenant I made with their fathers. What's the nature of this covenant? It's not going to be on stone, but I will write my law on their hearts and their inward parts, and I will be their God, singular, and they will be my people. But the reason that there's going to be a new covenant is that they broke the old one. I don't want this to be too philosophical, but just think about this. Did Ezekiel succeed in what God asked him to do? Yes. In spite of what? In spite of getting no response. And this is so important because all of us at one time have talked with someone, and when they turn away, we kind of, and I understand that, very much understand that. However, we have done our part if they heard. It's not our job to help them to decide. They have to do that. Philip Slade, our mission teachers in Memphis, missions class had 3 foundations. We need to universalize the message. Israel was to be a light to the nations. We're the city set on a hill. And I'm always pleased to be in a congregation that has multiple efforts to take the gospel to the world. But here's the second one, work for a valid decision. And if a person hears and reaches a valid decision of no, then you have done what God sent you to do. I mentioned this, I'm at church camp in the summer, which was December in Australia. He's probably 25, less than 30. We're sitting on a table and he says, he said, I really think I was baptized to get my mother-in-law off of my back. And I said, we all need to do the right thing for the right reason. And if you're really convinced of that, when you get back, John's a really good brother. He's got 2 feet on the ground. you go talk to John. I would encourage you to think about being rebaptized, because if you did the right thing for the wrong reason, that's not what God wants you to do. I wasn't there. My brother's at a camp on Friday. They looked through the enrollment. We have 5 people here who aren't Christians Sunday night. Wouldn't it be wonderful if when we leave on Friday, everybody's a Christian? So Kelly, what happens if you're one of the last 2 holds out and you haven't been baptized by Wednesday night? They never called your name, but everyone says, oh, we've only got 2 people left this week who haven't been baptized. See, you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. Universalize the message, work for a valid decision, and if they say no, you've done the right thing. And then the third thing's work for persistence. From the very beginning, and I've often told people, I can't live for you. You have to make this choice. I won't answer for you before God. And from the very beginning, you have to be responsible for your own faith. Universalize the message, seek for a valid decision, work for persistence, and these poor prophets preach their hearts out, and as far as we can tell, to no avail. However, if the people heard and said no, then the prophet did what God sent him to do. And that to me is a really important reminder. So that was my question on the bottom. Did Ezekiel equip his audience to make a valid decision? And what we're going to see is that he is the visual aid prophet. We'll touch on some of these next week. He's the watchman. He's the guy that shaves his beard and his hair. He's going to lay on his side. He's going to do a whole group of things that are going to take place. And yes, he's going to speak, but in addition to just his words, his life is going to be like a living parable of all the things he's going to be teaching and speaking. So, last thought, and again, thank you for your patience. The name Israel, Jacob wrestled with the angel all night, and Israel means he who strives or he who wrestles with God. And I would submit, when you read Jeremiah and Ezekiel, 1,000 years later, God's people are living up to the name that God gave Jacob after the night he wrestled with the angel. God's people are striving and wrestling with God, and God says, thus saith the Lord, speak my word, and even though they don't listen, when these things come to pass, they will know that a prophet has been among them. God bless.